This is ultimately about the liberation of the American people and, by extension, people around the world. To understand what is really happening, we first need to look closely at how the Federal Reserve and the global financial system operate. When we do that, it becomes clear that ordinary Americans are not the ones going bankrupt. Instead, the real crisis is unfolding within a corrupt financial structure that has dominated nations for generations. For more than 20 years, what are often referred to as the white hats have been working behind the scenes to confront and dismantle groups that seized control of the global monetary system. This system is not merely financial, it functions as a form of psychological and social control. A small, secretive elite has been able to create money out of nothing, manipulate debt, and then use that artificial debt to extract real wealth and resources from entire nations. As part of this long-term effort, negotiations have taken place with major global powers, including Russia, China, and the BRICS nations. The goal has been to transition away from the current model and toward a new financial system, one that does not rely on an unelected elite printing money endlessly, trapping countries in debt, and enforcing compliance through economic pressure. What is being prepared is a fundamental reset of how money, value, and sovereignty work. At the core of this transition is a complete jubilee, the elimination of all debt, both public and private. This would be followed by a redistribution of assets designed to restore basic economic security. Under this plan, everyone would own their own home. Those who already own homes would be compensated fairly to ensure balance and equity. The intention is not punishment, but correction, repairing a system that has been distorted for decades. This plan has gained significant support, though strong opposition remains from those who benefit from the existing order. To better understand the problem, consider a recent explanation given by a U.S. congressman regarding a widely misreported event. Headlines claim that Donald Trump secretly moved $500 million from a Venezuelan oil sale into a bank account in Qatar for personal gain. Predictably, critics erupted, but those headlines were misleading. What actually happened is that the United States completed its first ever sale of Venezuelan oil valued at approximately $500 million. That money is being held in accounts controlled by the U.S. government, with one such account located in Qatar. Trump also signed an executive order shielding those funds from courts and creditors, preventing debt holders from immediately seizing the money. This context is crucial. For nearly a century, dating back to before World War II, the global banking system has been dominated by powerful financial institutions. These banks wrote the rules. They created debt, charged interest, and enforced repayment on their terms. Nations were offered loans, but the deals were never fair. When debts came due, banks demanded real assets in return: oil reserves, land, infrastructure, and national resources. In many cases, the money loaned out was created out of thin air or sourced from illicit flows, including narcotics money, which Trump disrupted significantly through actions in Venezuela. When countries inevitably struggled to repay, creditors moved in. Greece, for example, lost control over major monuments and cultural heritage sites as a result of these debt traps. Without legal protection, the $500 million from the Venezuelan oil sale would have been immediately claimed by creditors due to Venezuela's massive outstanding debt. But by keeping the funds under U.S. government control and shielding them from seizure, that money was diverted away from the old imperial banking system. It no longer flowed through globalist courts or creditor networks. Instead, it was placed under sovereign national control. This shift represents a direct challenge to decades of financial dominance. For generations, international banking networks dictated terms to entire nations, stripping them of autonomy through debt. What we are witnessing now is an attempt to break that cycle and move toward a system where nations and people regain control over their economic futures.
From this perspective, supporters argue that the struggle is no longer just about one politician or one election, but about who truly controls global finance and political power. They claim that the current system survives by fear, debt, and division, and that whenever meaningful reform threatens entrenched interests, chaos and distraction quickly follow. However, these claims are deeply controversial and often presented without verifiable evidence. Allegations about shadowy elites, imposters, or secret cabals reflect a broader distrust in institutions rather than proven facts. What is undeniable, though, is that public confidence in financial and political leadership has eroded significantly. Many people feel locked into a system where debt never ends, accountability is rare, and ordinary citizens pay the price for decisions made far above their heads. Some narratives go further, framing the conflict as not only political or economic, but cultural and even spiritual. In this telling, entire communities are unfairly implicated for the actions of powerful individuals, which creates dangerous confusion. Conflating religious or ethnic identity with the behavior of political or financial actors risks fueling hatred rather than addressing real problems. Collective blame does not liberate anyone, it only deepens division. What deserves attention instead is the underlying fear driving these stories. The fear of endless debt, loss of sovereignty, and permanent instability. History shows that when people feel economically trapped, they become more susceptible to extreme explanations and catastrophic predictions. War, sanctions, and regime change policies are often interpreted through this lens, not as isolated events, but as deliberate attempts to preserve an old order through force. Rising tensions involving Iran, Cuba, or other nations are frequently cited as evidence of desperation by declining power structures. Critics argue that military pressure and economic blockades no longer guarantee dominance in a world where technology, alliances, and asymmetric capabilities have changed the balance of power. Whether or not these assessments are accurate, they highlight a growing belief that coercion is replacing diplomacy and that escalation is being used to distract from systemic financial failures. Ultimately, the most important question is not whether one figure is a hero or a villain, but whether future systems will be built on transparency, sovereignty, and fairness, or on secrecy, leverage, and perpetual debt. If reform is real, it must be grounded in verifiable facts, ethical principles, and respect for human dignity. Without that foundation, even the promise of liberation risks becoming just another story told to people who are already exhausted by broken systems.
At present, there is no formal naval blockade in place against Cuba. Even so, the situation has drawn international attention, particularly from China, which has publicly voiced opposition to sanctions and economic pressure. Chinese officials have called for the immediate lifting of restrictions on Cuba, stating their intention to continue offering economic and political support. From Beijing's perspective, sanctions are seen not as tools of reform, but as instruments that accelerate economic collapse and humanitarian suffering. At the same time, U.S. policymakers are closely monitoring Cuba's economic condition, which has been described as being in severe decline. For critics of interventionist policies, this moment is framed as a test of resolve, whether nations will continue to rely on pressure, isolation, and coercion, or whether cooperation and sovereignty will take precedence. Supporters of a hardline approach argue that unity and firmness are essential, believing that global power structures are vulnerable in ways they have not been before. Some commentators go much further, claiming that coordinated efforts have been made in recent years to destabilize major governments, including China. They argue that internal struggles within powerful states reflect a broader contest for global influence. However, such claims are difficult to verify and often rely on anonymous sources or speculative interpretations. What is more observable is that major powers are undergoing internal restructuring, purges, and reforms as they respond to both internal pressure and external competition. Attention is also increasingly focused on alliances among Western intelligence and security partners, often referred to as the Five Eyes, which include the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. Advocates of reform argue that these networks could either reinforce entrenched systems of control or alternatively support a transition toward greater transparency and national self-determination. Which path they take remains an open question. The discussion then shifts to Canada, particularly the province of Alberta, where calls for greater autonomy or even independence have gained visibility. Many Albertans feel that their economic contributions, especially from oil and energy, have not translated into fair returns for their communities. This frustration is real and long-standing, rooted in concerns over revenue distribution, federal policies, and economic opportunity. However, reducing the issue to a simple conflict between regions oversimplifies the problem. Energy export limitations are influenced by a complex mix of corporate interests, international markets, environmental regulations, and geopolitical considerations. Large multinational corporations, global finance, and foreign policy priorities all play a role in shaping outcomes, often beyond the control of provincial or even national governments. From this broader viewpoint, Alberta's grievances are part of a much larger global debate about resource control, sovereignty, and who ultimately benefits from economic production. The challenge is not merely regional, but systemic. Addressing it requires more than shifting blame. It requires structural reform and transparent decision-making. Those who believe the global system is already changing argue that the majority of the world is moving toward multipolarity, where no single power dictates terms. Whether this is liberation or simply a redistribution of influence remains to be seen. What is clear is that faith in existing institutions has weakened, and many people are demanding systems that genuinely reflect democratic principles. In the end, the goal articulated by reform advocates is straightforward, even if the path is not. A government that truly represents its people, operates transparently, and serves the public interest rather than entrenched elites. Whether such a transformation can occur peacefully and pragmatically will depend not on grand promises, but on measurable reforms, accountability, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths without replacing them with new myths. Having concluded his opening remarks, the speaker transitions to a question and answer session with readers and viewers. The first question reflects a concern shared by many Americans: the rising cost of living and the growing sense that everyday expenses have become unaffordable for the average household. With economic pressure intensifying, people want to know when and if prices will begin to fall. In response, the speaker frames the issue as systemic rather than cyclical. He argues that inflation and high prices are not merely the result of market forces, but of a deeply flawed economic structure designed to extract maximum value from the population in order to sustain institutions that are no longer viable. In this view, food prices, housing costs, and basic necessities are inflated artificially, not by necessity, but by policy choices and entrenched interests attempting to preserve their dominance. From this perspective, real relief cannot come from minor adjustments or temporary subsidies. Instead, the speaker claims that meaningful improvement would require a fundamental break with the existing system and the creation of a new framework for governance and economic management. He suggests that debt forgiveness, asset restructuring, and a comprehensive economic reset could rapidly raise living standards if implemented decisively. Whether or not one agrees with this assessment, it reflects a broader public frustration with incremental reforms that fail to address root causes. The comparison to China is then introduced to illustrate what centralized long-term economic planning can achieve under certain conditions. The example cited, China's industrial and shipbuilding capacity, highlights the scale and coordination possible when a country aligns infrastructure, policy, and production toward national goals. Critics would argue that such efficiency comes with trade-offs in transparency and individual freedoms, but the comparison underscores growing anxiety in the United States about declining competitiveness and strategic capacity. The next question shifts from economics to political leadership and trust. A reader raises concerns about perceived support for prominent figures with controversial histories, particularly during periods of global instability. The underlying worry is not about one individual, but about a recurring pattern. During times of crisis, familiar elites often reposition themselves to retain influence, even as public trust erodes. The question reflects a broader sentiment that this may be a moment when citizens should be especially cautious about whom they trust. In response, the speaker emphasizes the difference between reporting observed events and endorsing specific individuals. He argues that describing power dynamics at international forums such as Davos does not imply approval of the actors involved. From his point of view, divisions within traditional power structures are real and significant, but neither side represents a satisfactory future. The existing political and financial leadership, regardless of faction, is portrayed as disconnected from public needs and unworthy of continued authority. This answer highlights a key theme running throughout the discussion: widespread rejection of elite continuity. Rather than choosing between rival factions of the same ruling class, the speaker advocates for entirely new leadership drawn from outside entrenched systems. This sentiment resonates with audiences who feel that political change too often amounts to rotating faces rather than transforming institutions. As the session continues, the questions expand outward, touching on international developments, diplomatic meetings, and shifting alliances, particularly in Asia. These topics suggest that the audience views domestic economic hardship and global geopolitical change as deeply interconnected. The implication is that what happens in international forums today may shape national living standards tomorrow. Taken together, the exchange reflects a growing desire for transparency, accountability, and systemic reform. Regardless of the rhetoric used to describe the problem, the underlying message is clear. Many people believe the current economic and political order is no longer serving the majority, and that superficial fixes will not be enough. Whether transformation comes through gradual reform or more radical restructuring remains an open and deeply contested question. The discussion then turns to Asia with a question about whether current diplomatic meetings are actually meaningful or simply symbolic. Viewers want to know whether Japan plays a substantive role and whether these developments deserve serious attention. In response, the speaker suggests that much of the real activity is happening behind closed doors rather than in public statements. According to this view, Asian governments are exploring large-scale economic cooperation with Western countries, framed not as traditional loans but as investment or reconstruction support without formal repayment obligations. While claims of specific figures and conditions remain unverified, the broader idea reflects a growing interest in reshaping global financial relationships away from debt-driven dependency. Japan is mentioned as a potential venue for future discussions, signaling its continued importance as a diplomatic bridge between East and West. More broadly, the narrative emphasizes a transition toward structural change rather than short-term agreements. Whether one accepts the language used or not, the underlying theme is cooperation aimed at stabilizing economies and reducing the influence of opaque power structures in East Asia. From a mainstream perspective, this aligns with the observable trend toward multipolar negotiations rather than unilateral dominance. The next question focuses on Myanmar, where political instability and military-led governance have raised international concern. In response, the speaker describes the country as effectively fragmented, with different regions and groups asserting autonomy amid ongoing conflict. While the situation on the ground is complex and contested, it is widely acknowledged that Myanmar faces internal division, armed resistance, and humanitarian crises. The speaker frames the conflict as part of a broader geopolitical struggle involving regional powers and competing strategic interests. From a more conventional analytical standpoint, Myanmar's instability reflects overlapping factors: ethnic tensions, military control, resource competition, and the influence of neighboring countries. Competition over natural resources, such as rare minerals and metals, adds another layer, making the region strategically significant beyond its borders. This is then connected to a larger vision of a multipolar world order. Rather than a system dominated by a single superpower, the emerging model described is one in which East and West coexist as relative equals, balancing influence through negotiation rather than subjugation. While the rhetoric may be dramatic, the core idea mirrors a real and widely discussed shift in international relations toward multipolarity. The final question addresses technology and the future of work, referencing claims that artificial intelligence could eliminate most jobs within the next 5 years, rendering money and labor obsolete. In response, the speaker expresses skepticism toward such predictions, arguing that they reflect ideological agendas rather than practical realities. From this perspective, AI is portrayed not as an independent force that will replace humanity, but as a tool created and constrained by human systems, energy supply, physical infrastructure, and social organization. While AI will undoubtedly transform industries and displace certain types of work, most economists and technologists agree that full automation of all labor within such a short time frame is unlikely. Instead, the more probable outcome is a restructuring of jobs, skills, and economic models. Concerns are also raised about excessive investment in data centers and digital infrastructure at the expense of broader social needs. Even without invoking extreme explanations, this criticism echoes legitimate debates about whether technological development is being guided by public interest or concentrated corporate power. The tension between innovation and human-centered policy remains unresolved. As the session concludes, the speaker hints at upcoming meetings and developments, emphasizing that the situation remains fluid. Economic uncertainty, potential government shutdowns, and institutional reform are presented as open questions rather than settled outcomes. The closing tone suggests anticipation rather than certainty, acknowledging that while dramatic change is often promised, its direction and consequences depend on decisions yet to be made. Overall, this final segment ties together recurring themes from the discussion: distrust of entrenched systems, hope for structural reform, skepticism toward technological determinism, and the belief that global change is underway. Whether viewed as critique, speculation, or advocacy, it reflects a wider public desire for clarity and control in an increasingly complex world. The overall narrative presents a sweeping critique of the modern global financial and political system, arguing that ordinary people, particularly in the United States and other Western nations, have become trapped in an economic structure dominated by debt, rising living costs, and declining sovereignty. According to this perspective, institutions such as central banks and international financial networks have accumulated disproportionate power by creating money through debt, extracting real assets from nations, and shaping policy in ways that benefit entrenched elites rather than the public. The result, many argue, is a system where inflation, housing costs, and basic necessities are increasingly unaffordable, while meaningful democratic accountability continues to erode. Within this framework, recent actions involving control over resource revenues, sanctions, and sovereign decision-making are portrayed as early signs of resistance to the old order. Rather than allowing global creditors and courts to dictate outcomes, governments are increasingly asserting control over strategic assets and revenue streams. Supporters of this shift see it as a move away from debt-based domination toward national and regional autonomy. At the same time, negotiations among major powers, particularly in Asia, are described as part of a broader transition toward a multipolar world, where economic cooperation and reconstruction may replace coercive lending and unilateral pressure, though the scale and terms of such proposals remain uncertain. Geopolitical tensions in regions such as the Middle East, East Asia, and Southeast Asia are interpreted through this lens of systemic change. Conflicts, sanctions, and diplomatic confrontations are not viewed as isolated events, but as symptoms of a global power structure under strain. Countries like Japan, China, Russia, and emerging economies are seen as key players in reshaping international balance, while instability in places like Myanmar highlights how internal divisions, resource competition, and external influence intersect in fragile states. Across these regions, there is growing debate over whether future global order will be dominated by a single power bloc or negotiated among multiple centers of influence. The discussion also extends to domestic politics and leadership, emphasizing widespread public distrust toward established elites. Rather than choosing between competing factions within the same ruling class, many voices call for entirely new forms of governance that genuinely reflect democratic principles and public interest. Economic reform proposals often center on debt relief, asset redistribution, and structural changes designed to restore living standards and competitiveness, rather than relying on incremental fixes. Finally, the role of technology, particularly artificial intelligence, is addressed with caution. While AI is expected to transform industries and labor markets, predictions of a near-term end to work or money are treated skeptically. Instead, the focus is on who controls technological development and whether it serves society as a whole or concentrates power further. Taken together, the narrative reflects a deep sense of dissatisfaction with the current global system and a belief that fundamental change is underway. Whether that change leads to greater fairness, stability, and cooperation, or simply a reorganization of power, remains an open question dependent on transparency, accountability, and the choices made in the years ahead. Schiff says the quiet part out loud. Stage is set. True 2020 winner will be revealed. About the midterms, and you can see that they're planning to do something. Actually, Adam Schiff said the quiet part out loud, letting everyone know they have contingency plans. And you can see at this point, we probably know what maybe they are. Again, we could say it's a plandemic, which I don't believe that's the path they're going to go down. I do believe that, yes, there's going to be riots. Yes, they're going to try to push us into war or have some type of cyber attack or some type of an event like that to try to delay or stop the elections, and even turn it around and try to blame it on Trump. But that's why they're actually planning for the chaos. So Trump invokes the Insurrection Act, and you can see that Trump now is setting the stage for everything that they're trying to do. Actually, during an interview, he let everyone know that he's not going to be sending in the National Guard or anyone into the blue cities. He's going to let them deal with everything until they beg him to come in there. Now, think about what the Insurrection Act is. Think about what needs to happen. He's actually setting the stage, setting the narrative up, because he knows in the end they're just going to allow these people to basically destroy, pillage, and kill people during this period of time to stop the elections. And the people of those cities, the people of those states, they're going to demand that the president stop this. And that's what the Insurrection Act really is, when the governing body cannot handle what is going on. So Trump is already setting the stage for this, and you can see that the deep state players, they're panicking over everything that he's doing right now. Remember, everything that Trump is doing, he's setting the stage for what? To bring down the entire corrupt system, not just one little corrupt system, the whole entire system that the deep state players have created. And he wants to show the people, look at their system, look what they did to keep their system operational. They cheated in the 2020 election. They overthrew the duly elected president. They overthrew the United States government, and they went against the American people to keep laundering the money, to keep the illegals in this country, to keep the criminals on the streets, to keep the rapists, the drug traffickers, the terrorists on the streets, to keep their money laundering system operational. They wanted the kickbacks to keep the wars going across the world, to keep the woke agenda. They did all of this during 2020 to keep it all going. That's why they overthrew the United States government. It wasn't to keep and help the people of this country. It was to keep their system operational. It was to move their agenda forward. And once people see all of this and once people understand this, it is game over for all of them. And Trump said something else that's very, very interesting. He let everyone know, yeah, we're going to finally find out who the true 2020 winner actually is. And we all know it's Trump. I mean, he's not saying it just to say it. We all know that the deep state players, the D's, other foreign countries, they assisted in overthrowing the United States government. And then they had an insurrection against the sitting president on January 6th. No, it was not Jeep against Biden. He was not the sitting president. The sitting president was President Trump. That's why Biden didn't come out and say, go home peacefully and patriotically. The president has to say that. Once the president says that and they don't do it, it's an insurrection. That's what the Insurrection Act says. That's why they removed his tweet at the time. They didn't want people to see this. So what happens when it's revealed that Trump is the true winner of the 2020 election? Now, he's mentioned this many, many times before. He used a scenario: if a burglar steals the diamonds and the burglar is caught, does he get to keep the diamonds or does he have to return them? So if the election was stolen from Trump in 2020, well, what happens? Does he get his other term? He was robbed, wasn't he? What happens during this scenario? Now, there's nothing in the Constitution. It means most likely the Supreme Court's going to have to make a decision on all of this. They're going to have to see how they rigged the election, how they lied to the American people, how the people thought that Biden actually won when they actually rigged the election and they lied to the American people. So the Supreme Court most likely is going to have to say, ooh, this is an interesting case. Yeah, I think he's going to get another term here. Maybe that's why he keeps saying a fourth term. Remember, the first term people elected him, he used the Electoral College to bypass their cheating system. The second term, he allowed the deep state players to overthrow the United States government, overthrow the duly elected president. They staged an insurrection. The military took control. He was the commander-in-chief. That was his second term. The people then elected him for the third term. So will he be allowed to have a fourth term? Maybe, maybe not. We'll have to see how it all plays out. But the people are going to understand. They're going to realize that, yes, we had a puppet government in this country, and this is why the people experienced what they experienced during this period of time, because they were pushing an agenda against the American people. And this is what the deep state players are so panicked about, because they understand that the midterms are very, very important. Think about how important the midterms are. With the power of the House and the power of the Senate, this is the only power you can actually remove an elected official. Think about that for a second. Having the power of the House and the Senate, you have the power to remove an elected official, and it goes both ways. That's how powerful the House and Senate is. The president cannot do that, but Congress can. This is why they waited. This is why they allowed Trump to win the election. And what I mean by that is they couldn't compete against him, so they couldn't use their cheating system. So they said, you know something, let him have this because we can't cheat. We're going to have to change everything up, and we're going to have to take control of the House and Senate. There's no way we can compete with the people of this country. That's what they did, and that's why they said that's why Obama said we have time, because they shifted strategy. We'll be talking a lot more about this a little bit later, but first let's talk about Savannah Guthrie, because this is a very sad story where her mother is now missing. Now, was she kidnapped? Something happened? She got lost, but now Trump, he's getting involved, and now he's assisting in trying to find where she is, what happened. Now, most of the time they look at family members first to see if they did something. I think they're looking at the son-in-law right now, but Trump, he put this out on Truth. He said the following: I spoke with Savannah Guthrie and let her know that I am directing all federal law enforcement to be at the family's and local law enforcement complete disposal. Immediately, we are deploying all resources to get her mother home safely. The prayers of our nation are with her and her family. God bless and protect Nancy, President Donald J. Trump. And once again, this is a very odd story. Most likely what people are thinking, it's a family member, maybe the son-in-law or something like that, or maybe she just got lost and, all of a sudden dementia hit. We don't know, but let's see how this all plays out and let's see what happens. Now, the other thing that we've come to find out, and Alex Browetz put this out, is that remember Arena? Well, her killer, DeCarlos Brown Jr., was released from prison early because of a former Democrat governor, Roy Cooper. He actually released this individual, and as of right now, you could see that because of this, this individual decided to stab her multiple times, and it's imperative that Cooper is held accountable in November's election for what has been done here and what this person has caused. Absolutely. And what's very interesting is that the propaganda right now is fierce against Trump, where he's deporting a lot of the illegals. And what's very interesting is everyone continually compares Trump to Obama with ICE quality and safety metrics. So you have Trump first year, second term data, 2025, and Obama first 2 years, 2015 to 2016. So if you look at Trump's stats, it says mistaken U.S. citizen detention, or say 6-7% error. If you look at Obama, it's 0.0225% error. Well, it's higher with Obama. One mistake per 14,925 arrests. Obama is one mistake per 4,444 arrests. Deaths in ICE custody, one death in 18,594 detainees. With Obama, it's one death in 14,314. Mistaken deportations, 0 mistaken deportations, U.S. citizens, 4 for Obama. So basically, Obama has higher stats. So all this outrage and everything that they're doing has nothing to do with any of this. It's basically what they're doing is they're saying we cannot have these illegals deported because otherwise we will not be able to win another election. And this is why it's not grassroots. This is why it's not the people of this country that are protesting. It's Antifa and the people that they brainwashed and the illegals and criminals. That's why you only see a small handful of people. You don't see the whole state of Minnesota. You don't see the entire city of Minneapolis. You don't, when you go to California or if you go to Washington, if you go to Oregon, you don't see the entire state out there. You see a very, very tiny group that goes against ICE. So once again, this tells you everything you need to know. And this has nothing to do with what's really going on. It has to do with, hey, we need these people in this country to cause chaos, and we need these people to cheat in the election. If we don't, and this is the Democrats talking, if we don't have these illegals, we're screwed. That's pretty much what they're saying. And every day that passes, we could see that more and more people are being rounded up for sex trade. So the authorities in Los Angeles announced on Tuesday the result of a statewide crackdown on human trafficking that resulted in the arrest of more than 600 suspects and the rescue of 170 victims. And this is in sex trade. So the week-long Operation Reclaim and Rebuild campaign was part of a yearly effort by Los Angeles Regional Human Trafficking Task Force and 80 local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies. And they were able to stop this, arrest these people, and save those victims. And there were 156 adults that were rescued, 14 children that were rescued. So think about this. Think about what is being done right now in this country where they're trying to save these people from sex trafficking. Because you have to remember, we've already had a dump of the Epstein information. People are learning that the D's are responsible for all this. And it's not just in this country. It's people that are in the UK. There's royalty in the UK. There are politicians. There are CEOs. Yes, there's a lot of people that are involved in all of this. And this is their entire pedo network. This is just the beginning stages of it all. I do believe as time goes on, we're going to learn a lot more about this. And like I said before, all of this is going to come full circle because you have to remember all these people that have been trying to stop Trump, these people that have been treasonous to this country, they're also involved in the same pedo networks. They're all the same exact people. And now we could see why they want to keep the illegals in this country, why they've been trying to stop Trump. And you have to remember, this is not just the agenda in this country, it's the agenda around the world. I mean, look at all the countries like UK, when you look at Germany, when you look at France, when you look at Spain, they're all following the same agenda. This is the agenda of the World Economic Forum, Soros, and the rest. And when you look at Spain, you can see that Spain, they're giving amnesty to 500,000 illegals. And you know what they're not doing? They're not really checking their backgrounds. They're just taking the words of the illegals. Hey, have you committed a crime? No? All right, come on to this country. I mean, they're relying on the illegals to tell them the truth, which is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't even make sense. And you can see Europe, it's going on full lockdown and censorship right now. And you can see it's with the EU, it's with the UK, it's with Spain, it was Portugal. Basically, they want to control social media completely. And if they can't do that, eventually what they'll have is a communication blackout. Mario ZNA put this out and said, after France and Spain, Portugal now wants to introduce a digital pass under the EU digital identity system just to be allowed to connect online. They say it's for the safety of our children, but the reality is this is just another step toward killing our freedoms. The EU is an open-air prison, and Ursula von der Leyen is the warden. And yes, this is exactly what they're going to do. They're going to shut people up because, once again, to stay in power, they have to do this. Which means if they can't gain control of social media the way they want, they will have to shut down communications. They will have to shut down the ability to access all this information. The same goes here in the United States. Because, again, you can see this is all connected. Now, I don't believe they'll have the ability to do this. We might see it spotty from time to time, but I don't believe they have the ability to shut down all social media platforms. They might be able to do it out in Europe. But here in America, I don't think they're going to have the ability to do this. I think safeguards have been put into place. And we know that Musk has his satellites up in space. The Space Force has their satellites in space. And now Trump is in office, and if he has to communicate, we know he could do this over the phones. So, once again, whatever they try to do, I do believe Trump and the Patriots, they are ready for this. And I don't think, if something does go down, I don't think it's going to go down for that long. And you know what's very interesting? Yesterday, we talked about how the House GOP basically exposed how the EU was involved in interfering with many or 8 different countries in their elections. And now it seems that those countries are getting pretty darn pissed off and angry, and they want early elections because of all of this. Marina Fall put this out and said, George Simion, Romanian opposition leader, is demanding early elections in Romania following a U.S. document that points to EU interference in the 2024 presidential vote, later annulled despite Gheorghiu Disco's win. So this is very, very interesting. Let's see how this all plays out. That's going to be very, very interesting. Actually, every single country should be looking at their elections, just like we're looking at our elections here in the United States, because the deep state players do what? They don't allow for free, open elections. They have rigged elections. They try to rig every single election because it's the only way they can win. They're not for democracy. They're for dictatorship. And I think that's becoming clearer and clearer every single day. Now, the other thing that we could see is that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and this is coming from Visegrad 24, is complaining that Russian companies are being forced to leave Venezuela due to a U.S. operation in the country. And you have to remember, Russia began major investment in Venezuela back in the 2000s under Hugo Chavez, who received $2.2 billion from the Kremlin to purchase Russian weapons. In the 2010s, Russia's largest oil company, Rosneft, became a key lender to Venezuela in exchange for receiving stakes in the country's oil projects. So now they're very upset that Trump now has taken over. Now, I do believe what Trump has told Russia right now, and I do believe this is why Russia was moving into the Western Hemisphere. It's because NATO was moving closer and closer to Russia. So what do you think Russia was going to do? They were going to move closer and closer to the U.S. and to Europe and to other countries. And I do believe Trump said, listen, yes, I know you moved into these countries, but you know what's going to happen? This is something that you wanted for a very long time. Once we have peace around the world, we're going to make economic deals with you, and we're going to have trade with you. So you won't have to do anything. You're going to have so much business from the U.S., and the U.S. is going to have so much business from you that you won't have to worry about it, and you won't have to worry about being the boogeyman anymore. So I do believe Russia is already understanding this. They understand what is happening right now, and I do believe they're completely on board. And this is why Trump continually speaks to Putin, because I think their major goal is not to have World War III. Their major goal is to have commerce and to work with the United States. And Trump, I do believe he's playing on this. Now, out in Venezuela, we can see that Maduro's key ally, Alex Saab, he's been arrested in Venezuela as part of a joint operation between U.S. and Venezuelan authorities. So basically, as of right now, you could see they're removing the deep state government in Venezuela, and very soon what they're going to do, they're going to actually give the power back to the people of that country, and the people are going to run that country, and you're going to see that Venezuela is going to be turning right from left. And you can see South America, every single country is moving in the opposite direction that the deep state actually wants them to move. Soon you're going to see Brazil remove Lula, because you have to remember that individual was in prison. Biden released him, then he ran for election. They cheated him the election and basically won against Bolsonaro when Bolsonaro had the people behind him. It didn't make any sense. He was like the Brazilian Trump in Brazil. So the whole thing didn't make sense from the very, very beginning. And just like we had parades here in the United States and Biden won, did that make any sense? No, they cheated in the election. And you can see as of right now, the European Union, they're starting to break apart, and they're starting to go up against Ursula von der Leyen. And you can see this is the Czech Republic, it's Hungary and Slovakia. They're now blocking the 90 billion EU loan for Ukraine. Global Dissent put this out and said, 3 nations now stand against Brussels. If Orban wins again, the EU faces a long-term crisis. They refuse to bow to insane EU politics, a turning point for Europe. That's absolutely true. And Viktor Orban, he put this out and said, today in the EU, only one side of the Ukraine war is allowed to be shown. A Brazilian regulation explicitly bans alternative viewpoints. Who are they to dictate what citizens must believe? Europeans have the right to hear all arguments and draw their own conclusions. This is Brazilian censorship, Orwellian in nature. And he's absolutely right. And you could see that every step of the way, what is the EU doing? They're censoring everyone while telling everyone they support free speech. They are liars and they continue to lie. And it looks like Trump won when he was actually going up against Starmer in the UK. Remember, the UK was going to give away Diego Garcia, and it looks like at this point in time, they're not going to do this. And this is what he put out on Truth. He said the following: I have had very productive discussions with Prime Minister Keir Starmer about the island of Diego Garcia. It is the site of major U.S. military base, strategically situated in the Middle East, middle of the Indian Ocean, and therefore of great importance of the national security of the United States. We have the most powerful military in the world. Our military operations over the course of the last year were successful because of the strength of our warfighters, modern capability of our equipment, and very importantly, the strategic location of our military bases for staging and other reasons. I understand that the deal Prime Minister Starmer has made, according to many, the best he could make. However, if the lease deal sometime in the future ever falls apart, or anyone threatens or endangers U.S. operations and forces at our base, I retain the right to militarily secure and reinforce the American presence in Diego Garcia. Let it be known that I will never allow our presence on a base as important as this to ever be undermined or threatened by fake claims or environmental nonsense. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President DJT. So once again, he's letting everyone know exactly what will happen.